Welcome to GONKCAST, a long-form discussion podcast about the music of English electronic duo Autechre, album by album, EP by EP. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And this is our first main episode not centered on one of Autechre's studio LPs. That's because we've reached the momentous 2014 to 2015 tour, which Autechre was kind enough to release essentially in full as AE Live. These soundboard recordings were released in installments, the first two in 2015 and the last in 2019, but we're doing them all now before LSEC because it makes the most sense for our chronological trip through Autechre's career. On that note, I just want to clarify that we're not talking about the 1/6 tour, the soundboards released last year as AE Live 2016/2018. Today is only about the 28 and a half hours, the mere 28 and a half hours that make up the first AE Live. Now, tackling that much material in one episode is no easy feat, so we decided to pick 3 highlights from the series and use them as keys to unlock the whole thing. Fear not, we revisited every set in preparation for this episode, and we'll touch on as many as we can, but we think the best way to get into AE Live is to take it a few at a time. In fact, we wanted to be cool and pick 3 hidden gems or something, but then we decided that the listeners might appreciate it if we just focused on some of the most acclaimed sets in the series, so we're going to take deeper looks at Krakow, New York, and Asheville. One last bit of preamble here. Our next main episode will be on LSEC 1 through 5, unless we chicken out and break it into 2 episodes. Not 100% sure about that yet. But send us your opinions, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. Again, LSEC opinions, we want to hear them, gonkcastpod@gmail.com. Okay, Dan, what background info do we need to know about AE Live?
On September 20th, 2014, Autechre performed live for the first time since 2011 at the Forum Hotel in Krakow, Poland, as part of Warp's 25th anniversary celebration. A phenomenal audience recording by DSPH Sounds caused a sensation among fans, and AE spent the next year taking their exciting new set to a handful of cities around Europe, with one stop in Japan. Then, on September 24th, 2015, the guys traveled to Portland, Oregon to launch a month-long tour across North America. A month later, soundboards of 4 sets from the European leg were quietly released on the AE store, with 4 more coming a month after that. For a while, it looked like Autechre was content to share 8 of their favorite performances from the tour, but 3 years later, on January 30th, 2019, they added all 19 North American sets to the series, bringing the grand total to 28 sets and about 28 and a half hours of material.
Yeah, the guys didn't do much press around this release, but they did share some insights on their live process at this time in a 2016 interview with Resident Advisor. Rob explains that they programmed a set with lots of extra tricks and tools for the purposes of improvisation, and on top of that, they did more programming in between shows, thinking, oh, that would have been good if it could have done this or that. Sean adds, it's mad how fast the tracks come once you've built something, and it's multiplicative or exponential. The more you do, the more you can do. I think Boomcat puts it best, saying, the differences between sets are at times subtle and at others not, but each of the releases gives a different glimpse into the way their tools are exploited and manipulated. On that note, it's tough to pin down any kind of critical reception, as AE Live was more or less ignored by all but the craziest of Autechre fans. On Rate Your Music, the sets don't have many ratings, but tend to hover around the 3.7 mark, and Resident Advisor sums it up nicely, saying, if you don't get it, you don't get it. To plenty, it's just noise, and amen to that. But in this age of constant availability and musical snacking, isn't it nice to have an act on a big stage willing to present something daunting, something that threatens to overwhelm you? Dan, I've always got to ask, what is your sense of AE Live's reputation among fans?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You know, on Rate Your Music, there's not a ton of reviews, but I think it's mostly because, you know, like I rate everything that I listen to, you know, for my own personal, you know, reference. But even I don't do them all because it's just sort of, you know, it's clogs up your Rate Your Music to, you know, to rate 28 different sets. So I wonder how much of it is that, and how much of it is, you know, I think your average fan probably listens to, you know, 2 or 3 of them, maybe, you know, those original few that were released, and you know, hasn't delved into all 28. So yeah, I mean, it sort of seems like a fan only kind of thing. You know, there's a bit of talk about it on you know, the Autechre subreddit, but again, you know, that's sort of the place you would expect that. You know, I don't remember much other, you know, press around it or anything, you know, when they came out. So it seems like a, you know, the fans love it, and you know, the hardcore fans love it, and you know the casuals and below, couldn't care less.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it seems sort of beloved by fans. It seems, like people were obviously absolutely excited. I remember this very distinctly when, I can't remember why, but it was like we all sort of knew that the new sets were going to drop like any time now, right? That like North American batch. I think it was like the Designers Republic were posting, artwork. There was some like hint, but everybody was so stoked. And then it feels like, I don't know if that matches the amount of people that listen to it, because it just feels like nobody has like listened deeply to every single one of these, like everybody just has a couple or something like that. I mean, it might just be that it's too overwhelming, even though sort of people respect the idea of it. But what is your personal history with AE Live?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of what you just described. I was excited for them all, and I went through them all, as they came out. But I mean, with 28 different sets, it's difficult to dig your teeth deeply into all of them. I have I made like a playlist to collect them all, like on Spotify, and I'll just throw one on here and there. Just honestly, I'll just sort of randomly pick one. I went to the Orlando show, so I listened to that one, most often. But honestly, just because I went to that show, and I did like have a audience recording like before these got released or anything. So I had been, I know that one a little better, I guess. But honestly, just because I went,
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with the first 8 for some reason. It just sort of like lined up perfectly with, I don't even remember knowing about it when it was just the first 4. I guess, I don't even know if there was like Reddit. Were there like a big Reddit community at that time? I don't know, but I didn't even hear about it until there were 8 of them, and it just lined up perfectly with like I was writing final term papers or something at that time, and just listening to those 8 on repeat like over and over again while doing that. The North American sets I was obviously absolutely stoked about, but and I think I did a full run through, but I'm kind of like you, where I just sort of like pick ones that I have some, I don't know, connection to in some like distant way. Like I've been to Toronto, so I wanted to hear what Toronto sounded like, and I live near Chicago, so I wanted to do that one. And of course I've listened to Orlando because I'm sort of from that area, and I know you went, but it's something I revisit sometimes, but probably just like I've got like my 4 or 5 that I revisit, and I don't do like a lot of digging beyond that. I don't even think I've listened to the European ones much since they got sort of replaced for me by the North American ones. I want to start, this is going to be a weird episode because it's just different than usual, but I want to start with some big picture stuff before we then zoom in on Krakow, New York, and Nashville. Though I'm sure we'll end up sort of jumping back and forth and it'll get all weird, which is fine. But how would you describe the overall sound of AE Live? Like, what sound palette are Autechre working with on this tour?
It's tough to describe. I think it's like we've gone full sound design here. It's pretty nuts. Like what was that quote you read from Resident Advisor? Like, to some people it'll be noise, and amen to that. It definitely gets into like noisy territory. There's some wubbing kind of, almost like bro step sounds that happen. It's mixed in with there's a whole like section that's real sort of like electroacoustic sounding, prepared piano or something. But overall, I think it is it's kind of the palette of XI like turned up a notch or two. Really, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but really sort of leading into the palette that will be LSEC.
Wow, you missed a great opportunity to say turned up to 11, like turned up to XI, you know what I mean?
Oh, I thought you were just making a Spinal Tap joke.
Well, both at the same time. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the sound is nuts. It really is like noise. It's like, it's constantly verging on and sometimes leaping like wholeheartedly into power electronics or something, harsh noise wall kind of stuff. It's just relentless, like low end pummeling with a lot of what you were talking about, like those kind of like physical modeling, like metallic clangs that sound like real just objects, like, clattering and ringing out and stuff in space. And, it's just, I don't know, it's just wild because it's so like there's no melody. There isn't a note. There isn't a single note on this whole thing. It's just noise. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking a lot about it, like, over listening to these all, like, before the pandemic and everything, like every year I would play at like these noise festivals. And I was like, if this happened at one of those, it would be the greatest thing that's ever happened. And, it never comes, near that, of course. But, it has like that feeling, like if anybody, I'm sure people listening to this, at least some have been to like noise shows before. And it really does have like that sort of, feel to it. Not to say that there's no rhythm or anything, because there definitely is, but you've got to search for any melody if it is there to be found. And I think you mentioned like power electronics. It has like that sort of sound a lot in it. I think it's pretty intimidating for your casual fan, maybe.
Yeah, and it does have that kind of like noise show kind of quality to it, in that when you're listening to like some sort of harsh noise wall thing, basically they're like tweaking things and strange, interesting things happen. You know what I mean? Like where some like little feedback a burst or something that sounds like a siren or something will like suddenly emerge, and it's different every time because they're just like letting wires cross and like crazy things happen. And you kind of get that feeling from these pieces. I mean, they're very rhythmic, as you said. I mean, it's like, it's huge, like booming bass a lot of the time, like very rhythmic noise wall, but with that same character of like sputtering feedback and like really harsh glitches and like accidents all over the place, it feels like. Yeah,
I mean, you can tell, especially, going through all the sets, you can tell that there's like a skeleton. The same sort of like movements throughout happen, but there's definitely like, those moments you could tell like a happy little accident happens and they, sort of play with it for a minute or let it come back and, things like that, which, sort of gives it that like, jammy sort of feel to it and whatnot. And it's really like what's interesting about, listening to more than just one of the shows.
Yeah. And it's just sort of wild because it's like, it'll be like this just pummeling low end. And then there's tons of like just whooshing and fluttering, like kind of high end noises. I mean, it creates like an interesting sort of distance, I think, where there's like hugest low end that I think Autechre has ever done, and then these like really, really high highs and nothing in the middle, pretty much, like snares maybe, but like just this huge like expanse of empty space there. And it's just, it sounds like totally, like the structure is planned, but all of this like fluttering, like whooshing and like sometimes like feedback spurts and stuff like that. I mean, it all just sounds like it's happening in real time. Like, it has the quality of like they are holding on to this thing that is like barely in their control. Like they grabbed a snake or something and it's like just wiggling all around. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, that's a good analogy. I think it's, that's one of the benefits of listening to like a bunch of these sets, though, is a lot of people, I think, don't understand what electronic musicians are like doing on stage and stuff. And I think, a lot of people kind of just think they're pushing play and, doing whatever. Autechre's fans probably, know a little better, but I mean, really, I saw the show and they're literally just up there with laptops. There's not like keyboards and stuff all around them. So, if you didn't know any better, I could see thinking it's just a push play thing. But when you listen to it, you're right. There's so much that it is just, I don't want to use the word random because that has a negative connotation, but that snake that's out of control and just barely, they're just barely holding it in their grasp.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like the core, the foundation is fully in their control, but I feel like there's a lot of extraneous stuff that is just like wild, like in the way that power electronics often goes.
Exactly.
A long time ago, listener Chris wrote in to say that he doesn't get why some fans pine for a more hip-hop Autechre album when it's everywhere in their music. He notes that hip-hop permeates the AE live sets in particular. I wonder what you think about that and how you would describe like the style, the genre, maybe the mood here.
I mean, I think he's right in the sense that, hip-hop does permeate like pretty much all of Autechre's music. I find it a little hard to find in AE Live. It's pretty. I mean, there's definitely like rhythm there. Weirdly, the like most normal noise is always kind of the snare. Like there's a lot of times where it's just like the most normal, off the shelf.
And it's kind of a hip hop-ish snare,
Yeah, exactly. It isn't like the 808 snare, but it's that same sort of like off the shelf kind of snare sample. And that did like sort of strike me as a hip hop move, but I feel like I'm reaching for straws a little bit in trying to fit hip hop. I mean, there's definitely there. You talked about like that booming low bass. There's some like really interesting like kick drum patterns that happen. You can see the inspiration of hip hop. If you look deep enough. But I wouldn't say it. Permeates them the live sets in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That sometimes you hear like what you recognize as sounds from hip hop or like this kind of boom bap sound, but they are not being used in a very hip hop way, I think. Yeah. And sometimes there is kind of like something like a slinky like funk to certain like bass lines or something. It's got a lot of high energy throughout, and these bass drops, like they really do kind of like feel like they would get you moving in something like a funky kind of hip hop way, but the beats are always so like lopsided, and I'm always like I'm like trying to write down all over my notes like the snare is hitting on a different beat every goddamn bar. Like there's always something so twisted about it that is the polar opposite from like the simplicity of hip hop. Now, in regard to mood, I can't help but feel like Autechre was angry when they wrote this shit.
I think I can understand why. It does sort of have an angry sort of feel to it. But I wonder, and I'm sure we'll get I don't want to jump the gun too much, but I wonder how much of that is these being soundboards, and how much of it is losing the cheers and stuff of the audience. Yeah. Because I think that maybe that takes away the anger edge a little bit.
Yeah, I just hear this kind of like burning rage or something when I listen to this, because and like I said, sometimes those bass lines are like something approaching fun, but it's like incredible to me how it basically goes like this, just stomping, like just pummeling kind of bass like thing going on, just a tumble of bass notes. And then it'll kind of like stop, and you'll just get like metallic clanging hanging in empty air. And then that will happen for like 10 seconds before more bass starts pummeling you over the head. It's like they never chill out. Like they're just like in a, like, you call it rage, call it whatever you want, but they're like in some kind of burning energy, like this white heat, like all the way through it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's never like that a moment of respite, where you can lay back, chill, especially like imagining being in the crowd and stuff. There's never really like that moment. There's like not a relaxed moment in the hour or so of every set.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, again, kind of going out of our normal order, but what do you think about the visual aesthetic of this release? There's individualized artwork by the Designers Republic for every release. What do you think about it? And do you feel like it fits the kind of sound of this record?
I love the AE Live covers. It's so awesome that there's one for every single release, and that they're different. And I really like that style. Just, I mean, no text, nothing, to differentiate, which set it is or anything, just the black and white, geometrical shapes and all. I love these covers. I do think it fits, I mean, we get in this, black and white, geometry period, with LSEC and even, NTS after that. I think it fits this period, super well. The music itself is like so abstract and just fits these, it just sort of looks like a scattered, computer or something, which is, I think, a lot of what it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about like the way that highs are used, like just kind of sparingly throughout this, as I was saying, how there's like just this huge, like relentless low end. And then like no melody, like I said, and never any like sustained highs, like always just little blips or like little just bursts of high sound and stuff. And sometimes they are quite like they're whooshing around your head and like just, you know, it almost becomes like a static electricity quality. And it just makes me think of like, this was once like that kind of classic Amber era like sustained chord that hung over the whole thing, and it was beautiful, but it got shattered like glass pieces, and like that's kind of what I see when I look at the cover. At the same time though, I mean, it's kind of interesting because when I listen to this, I mean, I don't think of like the kind of mechanical, like geometrical stiffness of a lot of Autechre. You know, it's got like a very wriggling, like writhing kind of feel, you know, like snake-like, like I was saying.
Yeah. I don't feel like the mechanical, you know, industrial sort of sound here at all. I feel it's sort of like a digital, you know, kind of thing. Like this sounds like what I imagine Max MSP, you know, sounds like if you're really good at it, kind of thing. You know, it no longer sounds like a machine of industry. It sounds like, you know, a computer machine to me.
Yeah, it kind of makes me like the artwork even more, which I just absolutely love. But like that, it both reminds me of the music and seems like very different from the music at the same time. It's like somehow perfect for this release. You know, it might make sense to talk about how this fits into the discography now rather than later, as we usually do. Do you hear AE Live as like a development from the XI Elevent sound? Do you hear hints of even earlier Autechre releases?
I do hear, you know, a development from XI and Elevent, you know, like we talked about with the you know, the tour after Choristus and stuff, or that gave us Choristus. I think like these live sets are sort of like the missing link in between records, and you know, you sort of hear like that transition period that, you know, doesn't make it to a record. Like I said, I'll use your joke. This turned, you know, XI up to 11.
Yeah, there you go. Better late than never.
Yeah, just cut out you telling me to say that earlier.
right. I was kind of surprised by feeling like, you know, we talked a lot about how XI is like almost this perfect mixture between like straight up 80s hip hop grooves and like pure sound design, like electroacoustic stuff. And the Elevent was like a little bit like tilting a lot more maybe toward that sort of experimental side of things. I felt like AE Live is so much more Elevent than XI, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, which is a little strange because, you know, I would say, well, Elevent came out after, you know, and that's that transition or whatever, but, you know, they talked about how Elevent is basically just another disc of XI that you know, didn't fit, so I mean, maybe there's a reason that those ones are separated the way they are, you know, though.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. Like, I feel like, you know, not a lot of people love Elevent, but if you are one of the people that do love it, you might like really love AE Live. We'll definitely talk about this in more depth like next episode, but listener Joe describes AE Live as part of the process of making the singular release of LSEC, just as the wide extended universe of music from 2007 to 2008 was edited down for Choristus. You kind of alluded to this, but is that how you hear it? Like as a look at their creative process and for LSEC specifically?
Yeah, I do. You know, that last live set we talked about, you know, really, you know, you could tell the gears were moving in that direction, and I feel the same thing here. You know, like you said, XI was like this perfect sort of mix of like the sound design, but still, you know, the groove and hip hop kind of thing. LSEC, you know, I think moves much more into the sound design world, and you know, that's what we're getting at here. Maybe even in this one, maybe we've even gone, you know, further. You know, I haven't listened to LSEC in a while, you know, because of doing this podcast. So maybe I'll change my mind. But you know, it definitely feels like we're moving in that direction at the least.
Yeah, I mean, I used to like feel that way, that basically what we're getting is a glimpse at their creative process, and you know, and that maybe you can hear them like, you know, stumbling upon LSEC or something as you listen. But you know, listening so closely these past 2 weeks, and I should mention that, you know, a lot of people have noted that like C16 Deep Tread from LSEC does start to appear in the sets here. But I mean, for my money, and I might have to like think back about this next time when we get to LSEC, but that kind of feels like it, like you would sort of expect them to stumble upon more component parts that would become LSEC. And what I started feeling like is AE Live is actually, it's really like, I don't know, like 6 or 7 pieces, like parts, like I don't mean like tracks, but like sounds or something. And they've sort of been assembled in various different ways throughout, but it almost feels like every, whatever, if you want to call it a track that we get here, is like assembled from those same pieces. Like, I don't know if I'm articulating myself well, but it's like, they're not like branching out. They're just like kind of working with the same stuff that they started with. So maybe that means it's not like a creative process,
Yeah, I think I get what you mean. Because you're right, it is a little strange, especially with LSEC being, as big as it is, that you don't hear more tracks show up in AE Live. But
yeah,
I mean, maybe it is just that they release such a giant or they make such a giant amount of stuff that doesn't even make release, that we don't find, maybe they're bored with it by the time they get to a record.
Yeah, it might be some of like the sounds and processes and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's I sort of lost my train of thought, but I think it's that. Yeah, I think it's the process. Like in them using like the software and everything to make it. I would be surprised if in making AE Live or doing the AE Live sets, they come this condition, or I wish I knew more about Max MSP, but like this condition creates this cool effect or whatever, and not using the same sound that you used in AE Live, but using the different pieces, but the same sort of processes you discovered. And I don't think anyone but Autechre themselves would even be able to realize that or anything.
Yeah, it just doesn't sound to me like they are, like we're hearing them composing. Like it feels like it was composed before, and now we're hearing them doing like assembling and bending and twisting, but we're not like hearing them, like come up with new tracks over the course of the tour or anything like that. Like I feel like they sort of sat down and wrote new stuff for LSEC, I'm kind of assuming. But that leads us toward two of the bigger questions about this release. Why did Autechre release it at all, and particularly in the way that they did? And how are we supposed to approach it? Listener Joe says the AE Live makes him wonder, what exactly is the point of a live album? Is it to try to capture an experience that can never truly be felt except for by being there? Is it a consolation prize for losers like me who weren't able to make it out in person? Is it to showcase another side of a band and present alternate forms of their material? Is it simply to make some extra cash? Of course, every band's motives are going to be different, but I have a very hard time understanding exactly what Autechre's motives were in releasing all of these. So what do you think about that?
I could maybe see it as maybe the band knows that people are a little obsessive, and there's sort of a bootleg trading kind of thing that goes on with them, and maybe they decide we got all these soundboards, why not let people have them, instead of just sitting on some hard drive somewhere. Maybe we'll make a couple extra bucks, nothing wrong with that. And I think it's a good thing to release them all, because the people who want to listen to them all, they have that option. I think a lot of people probably listen to just the one they went to. It's a cool, I wish more people did release, stuff. I always try to find like audience recordings, or I frequently bring my Tascam to shows and tape them, because it's cool. I like to, have shows I went to, and also I think it's sort of neat. And then, it's also a consolation prize for people who, I mean, think about if you live in, I don't know, Montana or some shit, like you're never going to see Autechre, like unless you hop on a plane, you're never going to see Autechre. So, why not let them listen to it, at home while making a little bit of extra money? So I think it's maybe a little bit of all these reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting because you posted it on Twitter. I should have pulled it up so I could read it exactly. But then Sean said something about like they weren't interested in releasing. What did he say exactly?
Oh, well, you gotta give me a minute to pull it up.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't need word for word, but it's something like that would be a bit of a cash grab.
Yeah, he said that since it's mixed for the the venue, it would be just basically a cash grab and something they wouldn't really be into. I forget what year it was, but it was quite a bit earlier in the thing.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they were sort of opposed on principle to just like releasing live recordings because it would be sort of like lazy. And then they release all of these, and so many of them, which sort of makes you feel like they want you to like hear something in this huge batch of releases. Like there's something that makes this different than just a cash grab, right? And it makes you kind of think they want you to listen to every single one and hear like the development over time, or like hear something, like going all the way through the 28 hours, like you're going to discover something. And yet, like in listening to it, and we'll talk more about this, I mean, it feels like they're not so different that you need to do that. And it almost works better if you just pick the one you went to, or the one that you have some connection to the city, like I was saying before, and like just listen to that one.
Yeah, I think maybe they just, because like with the internet and everything, I mean, at the time that interview was, that we mentioned was done, the internet was in its infancy. And I think now it's like, why just pick one and release it? Why pick New York or something, and then people like me who went to a different show say, I know they recorded, this one. It sucks that I can't listen to that one, in good quality or whatever. Because even if you have a, audience recording, while there's a different experience in listening to that, they're never as good of sound as, a professionally recorded thing. So I think releasing them all doesn't necessarily mean, we're expecting you to listen to them all or find anything in them, especially because they really didn't like promote this very hard or anything. It was really like the first few were just uploaded to their store without any sort of fanfare. People discovered it. And then, even I don't even think that they themselves said anything about the later ones. I like Designers Republic and stuff did, So I think it's more of just like you guys, the fans always are wanting this stuff. I'm sure people on tour, always tell them to,
Well, it's interesting because I was going to say, like on the resident advisor interview, they say something about like the idea of making an online store, and they say originally it was about releasing live material. We had a couple people approach us with services for burning CDs on the night at gigs, and we thought that was a great idea, but then it became maybe we should make a website, which would be easier. We could just throw the gigs tracks online. And that sort of implies that it's like a keepsake, like you went to the show, here you can have it and go home and enjoy it or something. So that leads me to believe that it wasn't like some big artistic statement of like, listen to us like jam and create new ideas, but more just like, pick one and listen to it. Yeah,
I think that's what it is. And the CD burning thing, I remember in like early 2000s when that was like gonna be a thing. You always heard about it, and I remember like Metallica would release their shows on a website like after every venue or whatever, and I always thought it's a cool idea. Plus, I mean, a good way to make you charge $40 for a ticket, and then you charge $20 for a CD or whatever on the way out the door. It's a great little keepsake. So I honestly tend to think it is sort of that, more so than just, you got to listen to it and dig them all. I feel like they don't take themselves seriously enough to be like, this is some grand artistic statement, to understand us, you got to listen to 28 hours of, every live set, I think it's more of like, here we have them all in our hard drive. I mean, I'm just some, I'm just make shitty music, but I always record my sets, for my own thing, but I always pop them up on Bandcamp. If someone wants them, they can have them. I sometimes get a couple bucks for it. It's cool. Why just have them sitting on my hard drive?
But it's also interesting how like we know that they have like the Oversteps tour soundboards, but for some reason they're being like a little keepsy about that.
Well, because maybe going back that far, like, because I don't know, I read, I think it was in the Ask Autechre or anything, someone asked about the whole, releasing live sets, and they said something like, where we would have a problem like not doing anything to them. Like, do you add overdubs? Do you fix anything in it? And I think it was Sean. He said like that it would mess with his autism or something to just release them. So I tried to pay attention when listening to like the crowd recording of Krakow and the studio, or the soundboard one. We can talk about that later, but maybe they did.
I don't think they changed anything, but it just sort of implies, like when they say shit like that, it makes me think, well, there's something special about this tour that they wanted to release, not just one, but the whole fucking thing. And I don't know, it's something maybe we could return to when we dive a little bit deeper into specific sets. But, listener Joe also observes that, quote, there seems to be a continuum of set lists, where on one extreme you have acts like U2 and Roger Waters that have pretty much the same exact set list throughout an entire tour, while on the other extreme you have the pre-2013 never-ending Bob Dylan tour and jam bands like The Dead, where you never had any idea what you were going to get. So where do you think AE Live is on that continuum? Like, how would you describe the, evolution across the sets, if there is one, or are the sets even that wildly different?
Yeah. Well, bringing up the never-ending Dylan tour, the listeners speaking my language here, but I won't get into that. But it is somewhere like in the middle of that. There is like I said, there's sort of like this skeleton set list that happens. It always does that tinkling piano thing straight into the bro step dub in, and there's always the electroacoustic, something like kind of scraping on piano strings, and a few others. Like those always happen. And like you said earlier, the accoutrement around it always sort of changes a little bit or is different completely, but that skeleton is there. It's a little hard to compare with like a rock act, because even if U2 played different songs every night, it's still like they would play the song the way it is,
right?
Dylan's a little different, especially on that never ending tour, because even if you get a song, it might not be the way you know it or anything. And then same thing with the Grateful Dead. They're playing Sugar Magnolia, but it's different this time or something. I think it's like it's sort of in that. It's closer to the Grateful Dead jam version of it. We have like these sort of. They're more ill-defined, like just because of the genre, I think. But we sort of have these songs, and then in those songs there's things around it are jammed and changed, and then sort of in between the songs, there's also like these sort of like periods of jams that happen, but it's always sort of the same set list. Like, unless, it is sort of hard after listening to 28 of them. They sort of meld together, but I don't think that any of them ever like play any of those like songs in different order that I can nothing. No,
I don't think
it's always like sort of in the same order.
It's always like the same order, but I guess the general idea is that they have this set, and we'll talk about it as Krakow in a minute, but they have this kind of set, and it moves through various pieces, and then by the time you get to like, it starts to sort of constrict, where they start kind of like moving through it more quickly. And by the time you get to kind of the North American side, they are getting through the whole set in about like 35, 40 minutes. And then the rest of it is like jamming in a sense, because it's like I said earlier, like the same component parts still. And you hear like all the same sounds that you heard earlier in the set, but they're just like being sort of reassembled. Sometimes different aspects are being emphasized or whatever. Sometimes they like hang on something longer or whatever. But it's just interesting because it's kind of like the same set every night, with sometimes just 10 or 15 minutes of like kind of the same, but sort of different. It's like weird. It's hard to decide where exactly it is on that continuum of set lists.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It fits somewhere in between of those. I think it's really just sort of difficult to compare it with a rock act.
Yeah, and I want to kind of shout out. There's this. I was relying on this Reddit user posted in our Autechre. His name is Tarquin FF3. I don't know if is that like a Final Fantasy thing. I don't know, but he kind of made for the first 4 sets, the European sets, like breakdowns of what he thinks of as where the tracks break, and basically you can hear pretty hard stops, like right into that kind of electroacoustic, like just empty, quiet clanging, like we were saying, and then like a new bass line will sort of like slam in, and if you divide it there, which basically if you listen to like we'll talk about this, but if you listen to like a bootleg recording, every time everybody screams is where a track basically exactly. like would start, because it's where it paused and then kicked off again. And yet you hear a lot of the same stuff like over and over again. Like there are certain things that you might call like individual tracks, but it's like the same exact like groove that was earlier. It's just maybe like buzzier or like more stretched out or like slower or with a different sort of percussive thing on it. It's you know what I'm saying? It's really like just 5 songs or something, like in a bunch of different variants. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, like a lot of those, songs are self-referential from things that happened previously in the set. Yeah, for sure.
And that's what's interesting about like listening to all 28 hours of this is like, it's not just that you're hearing songs like 28 times, because they basically like hit that track, like hit these same sounds 5-6 times per set. So you're hearing like a million of that. Like if you listen to all 28 hours, you've heard like that kind of like really like, this user on Reddit calls it like the raspberry section, where it's like, and it's like, you've heard that a million times by the time you've listened to all 28 hours, because they like slam into that a lot. Here's an interesting comment from listener Ellen, who writes, "They don't always get it right. When they do, it is astonishing. When they don't, it can sound rather messy. I applaud them for releasing the good and the not so good, though maybe it didn't need to be 28 releases." Listener Tom says, "I keep in mind that these are live representations of what these fellas do outside of the studio environment. That means the choices they make are influenced by things like the room they're playing, monitor mixes, and most importantly, an audience. No matter what approach they may take or try to hold constant, it's a different context every time on a different day with different variables." He adds, "If one doesn't care about that, then the whole thing is obnoxiously and unnecessarily indulgent, easily a horrific entry point in the catalog." So the question is, we already sort of touched on it, but what exactly are we hearing when we listen to all 28.5 hours? Like trial and error marching towards some end goal, like LSEC perhaps, or just an assortment of snapshots that don't necessarily build on each other or anything like that?
I think the snapshot thing is a good, an analogy, because like the listener says, it does, each one, you are sort of missing piece of the puzzle. I think what they're doing, they're definitely like reacting to the audience at some points. And since the audience is missing, you don't really understand that. And I think, too, I mean, when it's done, in the studio, if you do something and you didn't like it, do another take or whatever. But here, if you make a whooshing sound that didn't whoosh exactly like you wanted, you kind of are just like stuck with it. You kind of have to do it. What's that? I can't remember who said it, but it's like a free jazz quote. It's like, it's only a mistake. If you make a mistake, like just repeat it, and then it's not a mistake anymore. So it's sort of like, and this whole thing like really reminds me of free jazz a lot, but it's sort of that thing, like sometimes you make those little mistakes and then you kind of have to lean into it, because it's like, you can't say, "Oh, hold on, I didn't mean to do that. Let's start her over again," or whatever. You're really like, withholden to the choices you make like on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I do like some of my favorite albums ever are these like jazz box sets where they show you an entire session or something. Like it's like super long and it was like everything they did in that period. Like I love the there's like a Live at the Village Vanguard 1961, I think, with John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy is there, and it's just like 5 nights or something.
Yeah.
And you really do feel like each night, they play the same songs each night pretty much, but they're just like chasing something, chasing the train as the song goes. But it's like they are after it and they see how far they can get, and then they like try it again the next night. Maybe it goes a completely different direction, but they're still like on a forward march or something. And here, I mean, it just feels a little bit more like that snapshot thing. I know that like the Village Vanguard, it's like 5 nights in a row or something. And yet when I look at like the track list here, they were in North America. This is fucking grueling. They were like playing every single night for a month. And it's like, can you imagine? I mean, imagine if you like had to play a show in like, I'm looking for like a good example, like Atlanta. And then the next night you had to be in Orlando. And then the night after that, you had to be in Miami.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
that's
far.
That's
I mean,
far.
that's not a lot of time
yeah.
to like,
No.
and just the idea that they are like, all right, let's start where we stopped last night and like keep it going. It's just like inconceivable to me. I feel like this is more just like clean slate. Let's see what happens tonight. And so in that sense, I mean, the question is like, is it important to listen to them in order at all? Or is it even necessary to listen to every set?
No, I don't think it's. I think no to both of those questions. It's maybe interesting to listen to them in order if you want to try to, see anything. I think there's some change between the European tour into the North American, and that's sort of interesting. But I mean, honestly, if you're really like wondering about that, listen to the first European and then listen to the first or middle, or just some North American ones. I think it's really just, you could do it in any order. I mean, like I said, just personally, what I do a lot of times is really just on my playlist. I just sort of click one and will listen to that one when I feel like listening to AE live. I rarely put a lot of thought into it. And when they first came out, I listened to them all. But they didn't all 28 come out at once. I think this is the only time that I sat and listened to 28 of them in a row over like 4 days or 5 days.
Yeah, well, let's start shifting into the specifics a little bit with Krakow. I'm tempted to say that Krakow is, like I said earlier, the template from which all the other sets kind of deviate. But do you agree with that? And does that mean that you have to listen to Krakow first?
I mean, I think that's fair in the sense that it's the first one. And so you kind of have to look at it as the template, From Krakow, it's hard to tell, like, what is that, skeleton and what is the, accompaniment and stuff around that skeleton, because you have no other reference point. I think it's interesting to listen to that one first because of that, but it's not like if you start somewhere else you're going to be lost and not know what's going on or anything. I think if you're interested in like the changing of it, and I mean, if you're listening to a podcast about Autechre, you're probably interested enough to do that. So I would say, given your interest level, start with Krakow, but it's in no way, necessary.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, and I want to sort of shift into like describing the sound and the structure of this set in particular. What's interesting about it to me is that Krakow and like the first couple European sets, like they sound pretty composed, like pretty designed, in a way where basically you have like lots of pummeling bass, like we were saying right off the bat, and these kind of pauses for just metallic clanging into more slamming bass. And then one of those times it emerges into like this just stunning wall of like ravey synth. That part I'm talking about, where it's just like all of a sudden like huge, just like glimmering wall of sound, and it's like kind of pulsating, and it's just incredible, and like the closest thing we get to melody here. And then it kind of shifts back into that kind of back and forth between like the pummeling, almost funky low end with like the pauses, and then we kind of build up to that like bro steppy part you were describing earlier. It's almost like shocking how it goes onto like a 4 on the floor kind of percussive pattern. And that to me feels like the crescendo of the set. Like it basically worked in 2 parts, where we kind of like pummel our way into this big like synth blast, then kind of settle back down and pummel our way back up to another big like wall of synth, like buzzy synth sound. And there's like this amazing part that happens after actually both of them, I think, where it's like, but especially after the second one, where it's like, it sounds like it's melting or something, like just digital melting sound is like just so incredible. But then we get like a little coda of some short kind of, ideas that get explored more later on, but like just very like just a minute of this, a minute of that, and they're a little bit more like a little bit softer, a little bit more shimmering, almost pretty. It even ends with like no low end at all, and just like some harpsichord that's almost like Boards of Canada pretty sounding.
Yeah, it sort of like lets you down softly.
Yeah, and so do you get what I mean? How like it feels like a clear structure with like a build to a crescendo and then a build to a second crescendo and then like the coda.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. The Krakow set and the European tour, like sort of in general, like really have much more of that feeling, which makes sense, it being early in the tour. Because God, can you imagine? I mean, doing this for a month, basically every night, it would get boring, I see why it mashes up, more later on. But yeah, I mean, here, we've definitely got like a clear like start. I can't remember. I don't take as good of notes as you. I can't remember which. There's one European tour. It starts with like it's like a kick drum. It reminded me a lot of like playing those noise shows. Like it was always like you had to get people to stop smoking cigarettes outside and like come inside, and they like do something where they like they do like some just sort of like kick drums, like about to start. Just we're flicking the lights here, sort of thing, and then it kind of went into the regular set and all, and that really felt like we're getting you in, this is the it was very like this is the beginning of the set kind of thing. I liked it. I honestly wish they had done it at all the shows, but I mean this one like definitely has that structure. We build to that crescendo. It drops down, we build to a second one, and then lets you out nicely into the show kind of thing.
Yeah, just like very, very planned, I feel like, which is, we'll talk about, but like quite different from what happens later on, I think. I mean, think about like standout moments. I love those two crescendo moments, obviously. I mean, there's just like the wall of synth is just like stunning. And then that like melting, gurgling thing that I was just like failing to describe earlier. It reminds me kind of that one track. What was it called? Y7 on Move of 10. Where it just feels like your brain is melting or something like that. But I also really love that what that Reddit user calls the raspberry section. It almost sounds like there's a lot of what I would describe as like tuba-like bass on this whole thing. Like it's just like very big and like buzzy, and that part in particular has like this like very like just stomping tuba thing going on, and then like little flute trills, like those little highs that are always kind of like dancing around on the top, and then this like kind of nice like arpeggiating like these nice blips, and I always like on the audience recording, like everybody kind of like screams when that like those blips come in, because it like kind of takes it up to another energy level somehow. But I don't know, are there any parts that you just love here?
I mean, I really like the thing that leads up to that, the big bro step crescendo, like just that it's so cool, like that little like it's just the most like tinkly. It almost reminds me of like letting like a toddler or something like just hit a key, like trying to play piano, like just hitting keys or something. But it's not quite that chaotic, but it's just so tinkly, and then sucker punch with what comes next. That's cool too, in the listener recordings to hear like the pop that gets, because even I didn't listen to the audience recording until I had finished all 28, and so but it was just like, that's gonna get a pop right there. It was just like it's like you can even in a soundboard you can tell like that's the U2's playing Bloody Sunday or whatever.
yeah, great reference. On that note, we got several emails about the experience of seeing these shows in person. Listener Alex attended the New York show and writes, one thing you don't get from the AE live recordings is just how punishingly loud their shows are. And listener Robert writes, AE absolutely knocks when you're hearing it on a big, loud sound system. Even with the music as abstract as it's gotten, the b-boy and rave roots are still there. The guys clearly still believe in music as a physical experience as much as a mental one. The beats felt earth-shaking and the bass slams into your chest. Some parts of songs felt like getting a full-body electrical jolt. It didn't get me moshing, but in the moment, it didn't seem as ridiculous as it probably sounds. So we listened to the Krakow audience recording, and you attended the Orlando show in 2015. So I want to talk about, what we're missing when we do just listen to the soundboards. Like, maybe you could just talk about what it was like going to Orlando and what you feel like is missing when you listen to the soundboard.
Yeah, honestly, like always when people like talk about Autechre live and stuff online, they always like mention, punishingly loud and stuff. And I think it's a problem with the venue, because I've seen other people there, Swans in particular, and Gerard got very pissed off at the sound man, which was great. But it wasn't very loud at all. And it's not just me, like, because I've gone to a lot of things. Like, my wife doesn't go to Swans or Sun or anything when they're in town. Yeah. And she didn't even think it was, like, ridiculously loud. Like, I always bring earplugs just in case, and we neither of us, like, needed them, or I don't even think we did use them. But I really think it was just the venue. I mean, the venue it was at kind of sucks. It's one of my least favorite venues around here. And so I think it's a problem with that, but listening to the soundboard of like Krakow, I mean, obviously it's hard to get a sense of like the loudness, because you're in control there. But, it sounded like the crowd was way more fun. In Orlando, I don't really like remember people cheering all that much. I'm sure here and there was, but it wasn't like that Krakow show. Like, I mean, there's people hooting and hollering, like almost the whole time, which gets a little obnoxious. But I don't feel. I hate fun, and I feel like I would have been a little annoyed by that. And I have no memory of being annoyed with people hooting and hollering in Orlando. So I feel like my experience is sort of a lot different from what people normally describe. In fact, I really wanted to, but with COVID, my wife doesn't go anywhere, so I don't have the house alone. I wanted to plug up the PA and just blast one, make my own. But I could figure out an excuse to do that.
See, that's a great point. Honestly, wishing I could do that all week, because listening to the Krakow recording, I kept feeling like, okay, I think I get it more, because when you're listening to the sound boards, it's like such a like gnarled mess of like tumbling low end sometimes. You can't even like really make out what is going on in that like tangled density at all, and then you've just got like these kind of fluttering highs like all over the place. And listening to Krakow, obviously what I'm listening to is the room, because it's like just a Tascam or something, but you really get that sense of like, okay, maybe you're not even supposed to listen to the low end. Like, it's just supposed to be shaking your chest. You know what I mean? Like, it's not actually, you're not actually supposed to like, you're not supposed to hear all the details in that like gnarled mess of sound. It's like actually just filling the room. Like I remember you describing like a Sun show, and how it was like more of like a physical like body shaking.
It was like when you breathed, you like felt like you were breathing sound. It's honestly the most nuts thing I've ever experienced.
It's so funny, but that's like the vibe I get when I listen to the audience recording, is like that's the sensation. And then the highs, I mean, there's kind of a nice touch even on the soundboards where the highs have like that kind of physical modeling quality we were talking about, and that like touch of reverb where they sound like they are kind of floating around or something. Like it creates like that those dimensions in the sound. But in the room of Krakow, it really feels like, what I'm guessing is that I would feel like, okay, my body is shaking from the low end, and then these highs are like literally bouncing around the room, like echoing and dancing all around the space. On top of that, all the lights are out, right? So it's like you know what I mean? You would almost feel like it's like feeling these things whiz past your head or something.
Yeah, it like disorienting, or something. Yeah, especially like, because I was thinking about that a little bit too. Listening to the soundboards, I listen to most of them in headphones, and that's like really sort of like the opposite of what a concert is.
I know,
like no,
because no headphones are good enough to shake your gut.
Exactly. And like, I mean, just any concert you go to, like the sound is always like at least a little like muddled because of the natural reverb of the building, and just the sound system not being right in your ears like headphones and stuff. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't think like in person you are supposed to like hear or notice like these fine little touches, especially too, like if it's not a recording, you hear it one time, that's it. You're not gonna remember every single sound you heard. It's
right,
like you can't like microscope into it like you can on a a live recording.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself thinking about that all the time because I was feeling like sometimes like it's almost a little lazy. I feel like almost like algorithmic in a bad way, how like just these fluttering sounds are happening constantly, like these like high stabs and stuff. And it's because I'm just the kind of person where I'm like listening over and over again and I'm like trying to make sense of it. Like what is that sound doing? And there's no answer. And I just started to realize, well, you were only ever supposed to hear this once.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are never supposed to figure out what that's doing. It's just supposed to feel like it's flying and bouncing around the room while this like earth-shattering bass shakes your whole stomach. And that, I mean, like just listening to the Krakow audience recording was like an eye-opening experience for me because I was like, oh, I get it. Like you're kind of just supposed to feel it and not zone in so closely on all the details.
Yeah, I think the soundboards are definitely like the nicer experience. They sound better and everything. But I think really like everyone can benefit from find the Krakow one's the famous one. But there's other I have the Orlando one. I think there's audience recordings of a good deal of the tour, and I think it's really worth your time to at least listen to one. Even if you only I only listen to the Boston show or something, like try to track down a sound or a audience recording, assuming I guess that you weren't actually there, but I think it's definitely worth your time to like sort of learn of what the experience like actually is, because I think like what you just said, listening to it, trying to figure it out, that's not like really what a concert is about. It's a much more like fleeting experience, and I think like they
designed it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. Like
that's where I settled, is like just I'm feeling like I can't, like I'm lost a lot of the time when I'm listening to these sets, and we've sort of like alluded to that already, but you can't always, even when I'm like following like this great little breakdown that this user on Reddit made, I like can't always figure out like where the hell I am. And I just started to realize like, you're kind of supposed to just be lost in it. It's a one-time experience. I
mean, especially like you said, they turned the lights off in the venue. So, I mean, there's really nothing to look at. Like I remember when I went to the show, like I spent a lot of time, you just kind of close your eyes and let it wash over you and stuff, because that was really like, I mean, there was nothing else to look at anyway. It really does like lend itself to that experience.
I was gonna go to the Chicago show because that's like the closest place that came to where I live, and I don't know why I didn't go, but I'm sure it wasn't so important that I shouldn't have just gone. I'm always kicking myself about this, but I wanted to summarize this kind of tragic email we got from listener Joe, who explains that he couldn't find a ride to see Autechre in Boston in 2008, then moved to Europe before the next time they came to the States, bought a ticket to the Krakow show, and had to eat both that and the plane ticket because he had just gotten a new job and couldn't bring himself to ask his boss for time off right away. Then later found out they played the only show they had ever played in the country he lives in, Latvia, just a mile from his apartment as well, a week after the show. He's decided that, quote, fate will most likely never allow me to actually see them. If I ever do get to a gig, I'll probably be crushed to death by a lighting fixture just as the venue goes dark in a final burst of irony. Just had to read that because I feel for you.
Yeah, that sucks.
We got a few more emails from, by the way, I kind of wanted to ask, like, was it weird listening to this during lockdown, like spending so much time listening to live recordings?
Yeah, I didn't really think about that till you said that, but yeah, it kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just feeling like I was remembering that feeling of when bass like shakes you, and I was like, yeah, I haven't felt that in a really long time.
This is definitely the longest since I've was a kid that I've been without going to a concert. It's been over a year at this point. I think the last one I went to was December of 2019.
I know. I was lucky enough. I went to a concert in Chicago in February, and
damn,
there like was COVID in Chicago, but I was like, oh, it's like the next bird flu or whatever. Who gives a shit? But,
you're still on the Trump train at that point.
Yeah, at that time, yeah. At that time I was a COVID denier until like 1 week later. Then I was not. Anyway, we got a few more emails from attendees. Listener Robert describes the insane energy and sent a pic, actually, of the Austin show and says, there were 4 or 5 dudes in front of me in the crowd who were absolutely getting down. There was headbanging, hopping up and down, arms flailing around. At one point, the smallest mosh pit I've ever seen broke out. And if you've never seen a handful of dudes who look like software engineers lightly moshing to the music of actual software engineers, you're missing out. Listener Darren says, I was at the Nagano show, which was at an outdoor festival in the mountains on a massive sound system. Good times. That's kind of interesting to imagine that there were some of these sets that were outdoor. I mean, Nagano, I think, was like a music festival, so it might be a special case, but that kind of changes the equation of listening to that one in particular. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't realize that either. I honestly ascribe like my experience to all the shows. Like the place I went is a fairly small venue, and so I just sort of like thought of that like the whole way, But yeah, I mean that's definitely like not true. And I mean, listening to it in the mountains, outside, I think is definitely a different experience than a shitty dive bar in Orlando.
Yeah. I just imagine like when I listen to this, like just a pitch black, like dank bar or something, just like a club that's like got sweat all over the place, and just like the floor is all like gnarled from all the beer that's been spilled on it, and it just has that kind of like damp energy or something. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's interesting. But any other like kind of thoughts come to mind about what we might be missing from the soundboards? And do you, as kind of a side question, do you agree with listeners who say that they can hear like something about the character of the cities and all the different sets?
I think that's like maybe, if you went to that show, you're just doing what I did, you're ascribing your own experience to it. Because I don't feel that, especially like I've lived outside of Orlando most of my life. I don't feel anything specifically Orlando about that show. I've been to Chicago a handful of times. I didn't feel Chicago in the show, or anything. I think that's sort of, hearing something that's maybe not actually there. But as for stuff missing from the soundboards, no, I think it's just mostly, that communal kind of experience, like the listeners that said, the people moshing, like that didn't happen at my show. The other one with the mountains and stuff, just sort of the scenery of it. I've mentioned several times on the show, like it's a inside joke between my wife and I to this day. Like we had a lot of people with like sound meters that during the show that were not together. It was like multiple groups of people that had sound like decibel meters or whatever. Weird. Yeah, and it's so like to this day, my wife, anytime she sees me, listening to Autechre or anything loud or something, she'll act like she's got her decibel meter and stuff. So I think you're missing things like that, but that can go for any live album.
Yeah, I gotta say there's something interesting about the quality of AE Live, like how easily I graft things onto it, because when I look at these city names, like I think of like, oh, okay, like Toronto is cold. This one sounds cold, like I do it. And then I'm like, Miami is hot. This one sounds hot, sweaty, like for some reason it is so easy for me to do that. And like, I don't know if it's like, I've decided it's something about the weird abstract character of just like these like dense noise walls that we're getting here, that like, it's kind of easy to read whatever you want into it.
Yeah, I think that's maybe something that people just do with like live recordings in general and stuff, is because you are missing that like portion of like actually being in the room. So I think you kind of have to like, make it up. And so you do sort of think of like, what I know about Toronto is it's cold. And then, you ascribe those kind of things to it, which I think is fair. I listen to a lot of like, Bob Dylan, like live things at bootlegs and stuff. And I definitely like think about that sometimes. Like the best Rolling Thunder show is in Montreal. And, you sort of think of like what Montreal is like, is cold and, maybe dreary and stuff, and I can see myself, reading that into that show and everything. So I think that's just sort of like your mind's way of adding that portion of a concert that you're gonna miss, whether it's a soundboard or a concert or a crowd recording or anything. It's just like that physically being in the room, the look, the feel, the smell of a room,
Yeah, if that helps you get into it, I think like go for it.
Yeah.
Like if you're like, oh, Denver, I can hear the mountains, I can hear the thinner air.
Yeah,
in the way the
everything
sound
moves a little
through it.
faster.
Yeah, you can hear that. If that helps you get into it, great. On the other hand, though, I do want to ask, like, do you get something out of the soundboards that you don't get from the firsthand experience? Does that give you any further thoughts on Joe's series of questions that I read earlier? Like, is it to try to capture an experience that can never truly be felt except for being there? Is it a consolation prize? Is it to showcase another side of the band? Is there something like about the soundboards that makes them valuable on their own? It's not just a lesser version.
Yeah, it's basically what we mentioned earlier. It's in a live setting, you're only going to hear that one time. You can't focus in on some, what was that sound? You can't focus in on anything. It's just whatever makes it in your ears, it makes it into your memory. I mean, even if you talk to me, the second I left the Orlando show, I couldn't have told you, I loved, this section, whatever, because it's just so much at one time, especially in something like this where it's these, giant walls of sound at times. So you definitely get the benefit of the soundboards of being able to hear things a second time, and like we said, you have the benefit of headphones. It just you could sort of hear like those reverby, like things that are not the actual room's reverb, but like modeled reverb put in there. That kind of stuff is difficult to like pinpoint in the actual room.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely fun to be able to hear it over and over again and stuff, but I guess I ended up just kind of concluding that these are designed to be like one-time things, like that it's more about this overall impression or something, and you almost start to just get like lost in it when you zero in. Like, you shouldn't zero in so much, you know what I mean? You should kind of just like let it hit you.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely something in that. I think Autechre just realizes that their fan base, especially the fan base that would listen to these AE live sets, are not those kind of people.
Yeah.
It's just like they have this like fervent, deadhead kind of fan base that wants to dig into it, because I think the Grateful Dead, I think that was their sort of idea with the jams and stuff too, was that it was just this sort of journey that they were going on for a show, and then people started recording it, and they leaned into it and were fine with it. And I think Autechre's just sort of going that same way. If you can make a couple extra bucks, why not?
Yeah. I guess we should move on because we're already running a little late. But do you have any closing thoughts on Krakow? I think I just wanted to sort of shout out, I mentioned the sort of tuba sound, but there are parts in this set, and probably in all the sets for the most part, where I wrote down, it sounds like Donald Duck throwing a fit. Like, it's just like, I can't do the voice. It was like, like, I just want to shout that out. It's just kind of badass. Any other closing thoughts from you?
No, I think that's good.
All right. Well, let's move on to New York then. I first got sort of attached to this one after reading the Wire's review of the 2019 batch, which says the sets really come to life in the codas, the growling, abrasive beats of Vancouver and Toronto, the skittering funk of Orlando and Miami, and the gig to download if you only grab one, the looming spaciousness of New York, swirling with black leaves. It's hard not to think of a forest. You strike out on the same path each time, but always find something strange. The weather shifts drastically, a tree blocks a path, night falls, and once again, you wind up in some new and alien destination. So what do you think of that description of New York, and how would you describe the overall character of this set? Is it that different from Krakow?
I think the North American tour, like in general, is like sort of different from Europe. Like you said, they kind of not rush, but they get through the main set like much quicker, and then they go on this sort of jam journey, which I think makes sort of the North American tour a little more interesting, especially like listening to a bunch of them, because you at least get 10-15 minutes of something kind of different each time. I think maybe obviously The Wire is writing something, for a magazine. They got to be, paint a picture and everything. I think maybe they're painting a little. I think really, we talked about like, people ascribing like certain things about the cities to it and stuff. It's like anthropomorphizing, but like, with a live recording. I don't know what the actual term would be, but the same sort of thing, like ascribing like a feeling or whatever that doesn't really like exist in it. I think the New York set is an easy one for like a magazine and stuff to pick, because I know personally, like if a band released a bunch of this and I didn't care enough to listen to a lot, New York would be an easy one to pick, because it's a city everyone's heard of. It's a huge city. You feel like bands could be on their best behavior in a place like New York, kind of thing.
Yeah I mean, I kind of feel like they get pretty poetic, and I do feel like it's kind of like just amazing writing there. I just love that description, but maybe it's overstated a little bit, like how different it is or something from the other North American sets. I mean, they do move through the Krakow like structure pretty quickly, and then they kind of like sort of shift into that like last 15 minutes or whatever. It stays like pretty chaotic and unhinged, and actually gets like way more wild, I think, than Krakow. But by the like last 10 minutes, it starts to like, you just get like maybe longer pauses. I mean, there just isn't a lot of like empty space in this set. We talked about it earlier, how there's just like throughout this whole AE Live thing, like not a lot of moments to catch your breath, but you start to get like longer pauses and stuff, like kind of start-stop type beats, and then it starts to get filled in with these like actually sustained, like ringing, metallic sounds, and even like kind of like, I don't know, just really shimmering, like kind of glittering sustained notes or something. Like it's just, I mentioned earlier how it's so rare on these sets where you get like any kind of held chord or something like that. And it's not exactly musical or like melodic. I mean, it's still like pretty noisy, but I do feel like the way it kind of like comes to an ending, I feel like they're just talking about the last 10 minutes pretty much of that description.
Yeah.
it does get like pretty drony and pretty like, that's where I think of like these kind of fragments of sound, like leaves or something, like just kind of sparkling over the whole thing. I mean, it's a distinct conclusion. I really feel that way. Do you?
Yeah, I can see that. It definitely is somewhat distinct. You know what? I think it was when we did that last live album or bootleg. We read like a quote from the band where they complained that like Americans don't like dance and stuff, and they said that. Yeah. And I wonder if like that's sort of like why, like you said, like Krakow has like sort of these moments in between the songs, and it's like it feels like it's like this is the space to cheer, this is the space to get ready for the next thing. And like I think like maybe that gets lost like because of the way American crowds are, where maybe they don't have that excitement and stuff. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not always that way in all of the sets.
True.
But I mean, it does feel like this one gets like a little dronier, a little like more drifting and stuff, especially in contrast to Asheville, which we'll talk about in a second. But like, I don't know, it just ends in a distinct way. But it's like, this was the thing I was wrestling with all week, is like, it's really just a small portion that is like really strikingly different from anything else here,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I exactly. It's that last, I don't even know, is it 10, 15 minutes or whatever on this one. I think really that kind of holds true for the North American tour. And in fact, I mean, that's what's like kind of so difficult about like talking about this is because it's hard to differentiate, what's in between. I mean, listening to 28 of these in a row, it just really like melts into one kind of thing because of the lack of like truly, I mean, when, this fluttering sounds a little different or something, like unless you're looking at it, with the microscope, it's hard to notice those things. So the only things that really like do kind of come out is these last, ending, coda jams.
Yeah. And I mean, and what I want to emphasize is like, it's not any new sounds at all.
No,
like, it's never new sounds. They're jamming with the same component parts. And it just feels like a light like shift in emphasis, because you'll be listening to this, like if you hear that description from The Wire and then you listen to this, you're going to be like, what the fuck are they talking about, until like really just the very end. And then you'll kind of notice that there's just like there's like a little bit more space, there's a little bit more reverb, there's a little bit more like of a glittering quality, and like kind of a gentle like ending that is sort of like striking, but it's like the same shit, but it's just like tweaked a little bit in emphasis. I mean, the question is like, so The Wire kind of just says like the sets come to life in the codas. Do you think that makes it a problem that like the first 45 minutes of all of these sets are so similar?
I think it's a problem if you are gonna listen to 28 of them in a row or anything. It's not a problem if you're just going to listen to the one you went to, or one that interests you, or you read The Wire so you're picking New York. I don't think that's a problem, because you're only going to hear one or two or whatever.
Yeah,
I think it's easy for a paper or a magazine or whatever to say it comes to life in that coda thing, because I mean, judging from what they say, they mentioned some of the other sets. I'm sure they listened to at least a decent chunk of them, and it really like does come to life at those points, because like that's where each set like is sort of different,
Yeah, and I don't want to undersell like the main structure.
No,
in fact,
no.
I kind of like how like on New York and the North American sets, how it's a little bit tighter, actually. It doesn't feel like they're rushing through the set, because like I hear people describe it that way, like they can't wait to get to the jam, so they just kind of like fly through it as quickly as possible. I don't think that's true at all. I think they love the set that they designed, and then it's like, and honestly, Krakow like maybe lingers on stuff longer than I would like. Maybe that's just because I've spent so much time with the North American sets at this point, but because it's all like designed out of the same component parts, it really just feels like an hour-long piece. Like it really, really does. It's not like tracks.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's rushing at all. I feel like if anything, it's tightening up. Like they just they've got rid. They've got it just to the meat and potatoes of it. It doesn't have to linger. Because they probably when you're programming something at home, just the two of you or whatever, you're not going to know exactly, what the crowd reaction is going to be. And I think like really the only way to figure that out and to tighten it up is to do it on the road,
Yeah. And it's not like they constrict it like so much,
No,
like
exactly.
bit,
no.
But I like the kind of tighter feel. And then honestly, what makes the codas special is that they are like often like kind of climactic, and I actually have decided that I just completely fucking hate that I made a playlist of like all of these different, they like I use Tidal, and they're released as like separate albums. So I had to make a playlist, and like I've decided I just hate it when the thing ends and the next one immediately starts. Like I have no time to decompress. I feel like that is objectively the wrong way to do this, is to like go like take a break, like for sure, because the ending, what's interesting, right, is that with Krakow, that kind of wub-wubby, like kind of bro-steppy part feels like this big crescendo, and then it kind of settles into a nice coda and like kind of, leaves you like in a kind of gentle way. And when you're listening to North American sets, you're like, it's kind of weird that like the big crescendo is happening 20 minutes before it's over, but they always deliver. I think like they do a little exploration. I feel like it's actually very brave to end your set. Like the Grateful Dead never did that shit. And on like the loosest freestyle jams, like they come back with like Johnny Be Good so that everybody's happy when they're going back to their cars. But it still like kind of leaves you with something like really take a break after one.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I have mine in a playlist too, mostly to keep them in order because they're not listed in order on Spotify.
Yeah.
And then I always you can click the song and go to album, and then it only plays the one. I did that every time because you definitely want to take a break. What I would do, I would either just listen to another like not an Autechre album, or take 20-15 minutes and wait, because you definitely don't want to go straight into the next one. It's just gonna turn to mush.
And it makes the codas even more special.
Exactly.
They are sort of short, but they are kind of special, and it's like it only works if you pause. So wrapping up with New York, what do you like better, Krakow or New York?
I think I like New York better. Just the tightened upness of it is more interesting. I really enjoy the codas. I think just in general, I enjoy North America more.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I feel like it's tighter in the beginning, and then there's something like really special about like particularly the last like 5-6 minutes of this performance that I think is like stands out among the sets as much as anything can here. It is very like kind of, I don't know, just glittering and shimmering like in this fantastic way. But, last but not least, let's talk a little bit about Asheville. This one has become a fan favorite in part because Resident Advisor singled it out for praise. They write, "This set is a perfect starting place. Of all the shows, it's the one where they seem to cut loose the most, the one where you hope the audience was suitably charged up, the one where if you're a fan, you'll most wish you had been there for. And if you're not a fan, it's a perfect trial by fire to make you work out whether you can become one. You just need to put yourself in that rave frame of mind because this is them at their highest energy." Do you agree with that description? And how would you describe the sound here?
Again, sort of the same way with I think they're less poetic here, but I think again there's definitely like, I think this is the more energetic show, especially compared to New York. Like you said, New York gets a little drony at the end, but I think at the end of the day, we're using the same sound palette, just changing the mood of it around a little bit throughout the entire tour. So I always want, and especially with this Resident Evil, like I wonder, did they just listen to a couple and they're like, nobody's
like one of the shortest, like by far. So they might have just like been like, I'll do this one.
Yeah, because it doesn't surprise me to pick New York because, like I said earlier, but Asheville is sort of like it's like a medium size. It's a weird one to pick on its own. So I do sort of like wonder if they're just sort of like ascribing that and hoping you won't call them out because you're not crazy enough to listen to 28 and a half hours. I
mean, I got to say that as with New York and The Wire, I felt like it was bullshit until I got to the ending. And then my jaw was kind of hitting the floor because of how like unhinged this gets. I feel like it's possible that they like got some bad food in Asheville and like wanted to punish this city for some reason, because they like try to bring this fucking venue to the ground. It does not get at all like mellow or ambient or glittering or sparkling. In fact, in that last like kind of 10-15 minutes, it starts to like bring up like just the most abrasive noises from the like the rest of the set, like the really like buzzy kind of gurgling bass, like the kind of melting sound. It almost starts piling it all on top of each other, I feel like, and straight up ends with 5 minutes of pure power electronics. Like there is no other way to describe it. It is not music, it is noise. And I feel like the sound guys must have been like concerned while this was happening because it genuinely goes nuts.
I do wonder, like, maybe it is a reaction to the audience, like maybe people were being annoying or something. Because I mean, remember we would do that at show, people talk or something and you gotta give it to them, kind of thing. I wonder, do you think like they're both on laptop, you think they have like aim so they could be like, these people are annoying, let's go crazy now.
I wonder.
They chat and texting each other, because I think like these little codas, I think they've got to be a reaction to something, like whether it be the crowd or their personal feeling or something. I don't feel like they just come out of nowhere. Because you're right. I mean, this one is like much more aggressive than New York, and most of the North American tour probably even. So what caused that? Is it an annoying audience, an audience maybe that wasn't moving enough for them, or didn't seem engaged or something?
I mean, I kind of feel like sometimes it's just like where the jam takes them or something. And there are just a couple shows where it creates like something like a consistent, like easily describable character. Like The Wire describes Orlando's coda as skittering funk, which I just like the sound of that. And I was listening to it, thinking about that, and I was like, you know what? There is a part that is kind of unique to the Orlando show and maybe the Miami show as well. That is like groovier than anything. Like it's like kind of a slow funk, and it's short, and then they like kind of launch into some of the same like really harsh power electronics territory as Asheville. So it's like, you get what I'm saying? Like The Wire describes the whole thing as like a skittering funk coda. That's not actually true. There just happens to be like one part
little
that's like
chunk,
kind of interesting. And it's just like maybe by random chance that I do think New York ends on like sort of its whole coda is like kind of consistently like drifting and ambient in a way. And Asheville's whole coda is like consistently abrasive. But some of them are just like strange mixtures of different, polarities.
Yeah, I think, that's probably the more common is that mixture sort of thing. Yeah, so I mean, maybe the magazines did do their due diligence and listen to them all and really pick them out. But yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, part of the reason why we picked these was because, they seem to be like they're considered sort of the wide polar opposites of sets, just in the sense of one ends kind of gently and one ends kind of like insane. I mean, we've sort of circled around this, but is that like a big overstatement to say that these two sets are polar opposites of each other?
I think, I mean, yeah, you're sort of just like saying this one little section on each one is an opposite of each other. I think they're still always, they're using the same palette. They're just maybe, going gentle, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say, in one place and maybe not in the other. I don't think there's anything that's like so abruptly different about any of these. It's always like sort of in the small details. There's moments, of course, that are like vastly different. But those moments are always fleeting, or at least fairly short in context of an hour long piece. It's mostly confined just to these final little codas. So to say anything's a polar opposite of anything else is overstating it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I think that it's not fair to criticize them for being too similar to each other because
you're not supposed to hear them all.
Yeah, they were designed to be like individual experiences, and but the fact remains that I think a lot of people are overstating how different they are. It's like a pretty clear, like well planned, well designed set with some room for improvisation. We talked about how a lot of these like skittering sounds and like some of the pauses of the metallic clanging and stuff feels like kind of loose in a way, or like these happy accidents are happening all the time. But the like core structure is pretty solid. And then you do get some like space to sort of close on something sort of differently. And maybe in retrospect, that sets a different tone a little bit, but it's really the same set all the way through, I think. So we don't want to criticize it for being similar, but what do you think about even more common complaints that there is not enough or any melody in these sets? Think about Asheville in particular. Do you find yourself like gravitating toward these more like even more abrasive ones, or more toward ones with like, the slightly more hints of the melodic, like New York or like maybe Denver a little bit?
I don't have a problem with the lack of melody in the sets. I mean, maybe it's just I already love like experimental music and stuff, but it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, like, in my own experience of like going to the show, I think I almost prefer that, because like I said, it was like really nice. It's dark to just let it wash over you kind of thing. I'm not a dancer. I'm not, you're not going to get me to dance. So I feel like this almost for me it would be more fun than earlier, Autechre set like, Amber or Try Repartee or something like where it was like sort of a more dance experience. Like I would feel out of place more. Like this was like made for kind of standing there and letting it hit you, which is what I enjoy in a concert. So I like that. Even just listening to them at home, I enjoy what it sounds like so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how a lot of listeners wrote in to say that they saw moshing. I didn't see a lot of people say they saw dancing. I mean, I'm sure there was some, but like moshing feels more appropriate maybe for the music that we have here. It is like physical. It does kind of hit your body in like a, that kind of body mind way that one of the listeners was talking about. It does feel like aimed at the gut a little bit more than the head maybe. But I guess it just means like, I don't know. It's something that's like, it's challenging, I feel like, to listen to. I found myself feeling like it's kind of exhausting to get through one set, let alone 28. And it might just be because it's designed actually to wear you out, like in a physical way. Like I feel like by the end of this set, they want you to feel like out of breath, Yeah,
I think that's fair, especially like, only playing an hour. That for a headline act, I mean, that's at the low end of a show. I think 90 is more, kind of normal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can start wrapping up now. I want to ask if you have any like other favorite sets or something you want to shout out that we didn't talk about today. But listener Ellen wrote in to say that her personal favorite is, I have no idea how to say this, Grafen Heineken? Is that like Heineken?
Heineken, yeah. It's where they make Heineken.
Maybe. Confirmed by GONKCAST. Grafen Heineken is where they make Heineken. Which just seems really tight and in the groove. And listener Joe writes, in terms of a favorite set, I'm sure a lot of people are going to mention the Dublin show. Actually, not a lot of people did. But he says, I think part of this is that it's the longest, but I think that it's also definitive in the sense that for the first 3 shows, they were still getting used to playing the live set in front of an audience. And then later on, the sounds become so mutated and deformed that in some performances, you can only recognize the parts of the set just from having listened to so many shows. Traditional bands will often either release, one specific concert as their live album or take tracks from various shows. But if Autechre were to theoretically go the first route and release a live 2014-2015 album, I think the Dublin show would be the best as a definitive document of the tour. What do you think about that? Can you pick a definitive set? Is that like beside the point of this project?
I mean, it's a little bit what we wanted to do. We said like that's why because at first like we really were wanting to kind of pick the hidden gem, and we were we kept talking about like which ones were different. Dublin I think came up, which I do like the Dublin one, it being longer and everything. I think I mentioned the Boston one is quite a bit different for the North American tour. But then
it's much more like the European ones, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think like you can pick a definitive set in the sense of like picking just one of them that's more normal, but I don't know that you can say like this specific one is it. I think you could just rule a handful of them out. I think the earlier ones, Krakow and stuff, like I think you can rule those out because you don't get into that coda thing, which becomes like such a staple of it. So I think something like New York, Asheville, like just any of those ones that's got that coda kind of thing in there, the jamminess, but it doesn't take it in a whole different direction or add so much stuff like Dublin and all. So I don't know that you could pick one in particular, but you could definitely knock some out of running.
Yeah. I mean, stuff like, I want to shout out like Philadelphia, which is kind of known for being like, kind of quite different toward the end from the other sets. I've always, I might just be because I've listened to it most, but I do feel like I like Orlando a lot. I also really, really like Los Angeles. I can't really put my finger on why, but it's just those tiny differences. Were there any others you wanted to highlight? Would you say that like Orlando is your favorite?
I mean, again, for maybe the same reason you said, it's the one I've listened to the most. I've listened to Miami a lot because I wanted to go to that one, but my wife wouldn't let me. So out of like what do the kids say, FOMO? I've listened to that set a bit. But yeah, it might just be like those are the ones I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of double check on this. Are we telling listeners who have not gotten around to AE Live that you should start with Krakow, New York, and Asheville, or is that not what we're saying? Are we saying pick whatever one you want?
I think like if you're intimidated by there being 28 shows and you don't have like some emotional connection to any of these cities or concerts or anything, like, those are good ones, we've narrowed it down. You're not going to go wrong with Krakow, New York, or Asheville. But I don't think it's in any way like. I think if you have, if you're from one of these cities or your parents are from one of these, if you have like some sort of connection, go with that show. I don't think there's any wrong choice in these 28.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it is like just pick one if you have a connection to it. If you don't, these are great. But I do think you should just sort of like, because I'm wondering, I wanted to kind of model how everybody should try to get into AE Live because I know so many people haven't. I mean, did we do it right? Like just pick a couple and focus how they're different from each other? Should you just pick one or should you just let the whole thing wash over you?
I think maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think like personally, like I enjoy like just listening to one or two, more, but maybe it's because
I decided this week, like, don't listen to all 28. Like, do not do it. It was not that great.
Yeah. I think I felt that kind of way too, especially towards the end. I was sort of like, no one's going to know if I didn't listen to Denver, but I did, for the record, I did listen to all 28 of them just for pure spite. But I did. Yeah, it's not the, if you want to take like maybe a longer amount of time, 28 days, listen to one a day or something. But I mean, I was listening to 5, 6 some days, and that was too much.
It really blends together. And I feel like you would do yourself a favor if you just like, honestly, just pick one and spend a little time with it and then like branch out to a second one and see what the differences are.
Yeah.
And then maybe go from there. But like you could do one a month. That would be okay. I always thought it's funny. Like it took Autechre so long to release the North American leg. And I wonder if it just took them that long to actually check them out and make sure they're all right.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Because I'm sure they did. They're not just going to release it. They have to.
They just didn't feel like listening to like 19 hours of shit
of their own
it took
stuff.
Them 3 years. Yeah. Yeah, but just don't do it. Don't listen to all of them. But on that note, how did it go these past 2 weeks? How would you sum up your feelings on AE Live?
I mean, I hinted at it. It became a bit of a chore trying to listen to so many in such a short amount of time. But in general, I mean, I do enjoy AE Live. I listen to it quite a bit, or not, especially for a live album. It's one of the Autechre things I'll go to. It's especially when I'm in a LSEC NTS, kind of mood. I frequently will put on AE Live. I like to listen to, like one of the sets if I'm like driving somewhere that's an hour away by myself kind of thing. It's nice. So I outside of trying to listen to 28 hours, I had fun. I had fun focusing on a few.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that like I was getting a little bit miserable like going through the whole thing because what we did was we spent like the first week just listening to all of them, and then we were like, let's settle on a couple and then focus on that. And I had so much more fun just like zooming in close on a couple, and like I honestly feel like I would have had the same amount of fun if we picked any three, the whole set.
Definitely.
But it was like actually fun to like listen closely. It was fun to take notes, honestly, like, this is new. Like I don't remember hearing this before and stuff like that. And that was actually a lot more fun than just like listening to the whole thing. So, it's interesting because we got to rank AE Live, right, as like a whole thing. But it's weird because AE Live is both an hour-long set and a 28-and-a-half-hour project. It is actually both things at the same time. So like how did you rank it and where did you rank it?
Yeah, I thought we would rank all 28 separately. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it is definitely hard because if you look at it as one set, I would definitely put it like higher, and that's where I'm gonna put it. I'd put it at like number 11. I think right. I think I put it right below Elephant and right above Garbage.
Yeah, I put it down at number 15, which seems quite low, but it's right below EP7, and I just feel like I couldn't get it any higher than that. And I was just feeling like the fact that it is so huge makes it like a sort of daunting thing that is, it sort of like drags it down, even though it's not fair at the same time because it is just like one set. But then even if I just focus on the idea of it as like one nebulous set that like changes from night to night, and there are like various variations on this one set, it's not like my favorite piece of music that they've ever created. I feel like it's a little, it's like kind of hyper focused in like an Oversteps-ish way, where it's like really a concentrated palette of sound, and it's like blazing insanity, and it's way like more unique, I think, than Oversteps, but it suffers from that same kind of like, I feel exhausted a little bit even when I've just finished one set. I mean, sometimes I just feel satisfied, but other times it is like a workout because it is like so devoid of melody and so just like, I feel like they're angry at me when I'm listening to this shit.
Yeah, that's fair.
So you want to quickly read down your top 10, even though it hasn't changed?
Let's go. Elephant at number 10, number 9, Incunabula, 8, EP7, Confield at number 7, Choristus number 6, Amber at 5, LP5 at 4, XI at 3, Chiastic Slide at 2, and Tri-Repete at 1.
And I've got LP5 at number 10, Gantz Graph, a lot of Gantz Graph energy on this on AE Live, actually. Sickly Sweet at number 8, Amber, Choristus, Untilted, Confield, Chiastic Slide, Tri-Repete, and XI, the reigning champ. Any closing thoughts on this chapter of the Autechre journey?
No, I'm glad to be moving on to a much shorter thing, LSEC 1 through 5.
Yeah, same.
All right, well, what do you think about AE Live? We're doing another listener email episode next week, so send us your thoughts, GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. Next proper episode in 2 weeks, LSEC 1 through 5. We want your opinions, hot takes on that, GONKCASTpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Look us up on YouTube. Stay connected on Twitter, Instagram. Both of those are at GONKCASTpod, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.